Hey everyone, welcome back to the studio for the fourth installment of Improvise Like a Pro. By now, hopefully you're getting into a rhythm with these etudes and you've started to unpack some of the broader concepts and ideas that are contained in them. Today we'll be tackling yet another quintessential standard. This one shares a ton of musical DNA with the last study we did on Have You Met Miss Jones, but there are some notable things going on in this one that make it different enough to be worth taking such an in-depth look at together. I hope you guys brought your reading pants though, because this one has gotten significantly more challenging than any of the last three outings. We'll go through the whole tune by learning the melody as a chord solo arrangement, then I'll show you guys some comping and voicing ideas, and finally, we'll go over an improvisation etude that I've written over the chord changes. This one is chock full of great licks and bebop phrases. I think you're really gonna love it. Today, we'll be looking at a song by an absolute titan of the American songbook with I Love You by the one and only Cole Porter. To start us off, I'll play through my arrangement of the melody and then I'll take you through it phrase by phrase. Just a quick note before we begin though. You'll notice that in a lot of places where in previous studies I might have opted to harmonize things more fully, in this one I didn't. That's purely for playability at higher tempos. If you were to play this tune at a more relaxed to medium tempo, you could totally get away with a thicker approach to voicing the tune. I chose to play single notes in certain spots to make this sound better at a faster clip, since trying to voice everything out can get kind of clunky at that speed. Have a listen to that arrangement now. I started out with this C note by itself, and then played this B flat minor 6 with one borrowed note to fit the melody over G half diminished. Then, the melody immediately jumps down by a 7th, which I caught using this B flat minor triad. Again, I'm thinking about B flat minor 6 here, and I'm just leaving stuff out so I can suit the limitations of the guitar. What's nice here is that this F moves down by a half step to give me the next change, and I don't have to revoice the whole thing, so it sounds super smooth. To wrap up this phrase, I played this G diminished over C7 flat 9 to suit the melody, and then just moved the B flat on the top down to A with a little bar in order to hold on to the rest of the chord. That then moves to another diminished to work as a neighbor tone to get back to the A note, which I voiced out as a C6 to sound like F major 9th. To move me into the next 4 bars, I restated this G note to call attention to it as the harmony moves to this 2-5, which moves to G minor. Next up, I use this diminished chord to stand in for D7 flat 9 and comp for myself to help move me on to the next phrase. Over this G minor 7, I used B flat 6 with a borrowed diminished note on the top to suit the melody. Then I dropped down and played a single note for this B flat, since voicing it out here would sound kind of muddy in this register. This next G minor 6 is just a comping moment to take up space before I play the end of the phrase like this. Since I'm playing this at such a brisk tempo, I just held out the G minor 6 here while I moved the melody note down, and then abandoned the chord on this E note so I can get to this F6 cleaner to finish the phrase. Then I did a little bit more comping to get me back to the A section with this move. For the first bit of the second A section, I repeated the opening phrase verbatim up until it moves to this B half diminished chord. The melody note, A, is supposed to be sustaining all through this from the previous bar, but the guitar isn't really nimble enough to make these moves happen easily, so I opted to just lay out for half the bar here until I played this D6 over an E7. This gave me the sound of a dominant 7 sus4 and fit the melody note perfectly. From here, the tune briefly changes keys to A major, and for that section I said this: E6 over A major 7, single note C sharp, and then A6 over F sharp minor 7. I played D6 in third inversion for this B minor 7, and then this E13 voicing, which you can sort of see as a B minor 6 with 2 borrowed notes. Finally, that resolves the phrase to this E6. Moving into the bridge, I played A minor 6 into this B flat 6. And next I used G minor 6 for the melody on C7, and then played a single note to make the move to the end of the phrase easier. Resolving into this F major 7, I played F6 with a borrowed diminished note on top for the melody. To move into the next phrase of the bridge, I played this snippet of C6 diminished to get me to this A half diminished chord. After that half diminished chord, I played this voicing for D7 flat 9, followed by this diminished chord for the melody. Then I played some more single notes before resolving to this G13 voicing to finish out the bridge. I did play this small voicing for C7 to comp for myself a little bit and take up some space before the last A section. Just like before, I played the opening phrase of the A section the same way I did the first 2 times. This is where it deviates, and for that I played this B flat minor 6 with a borrowed note on the top for the melody, giving me the sound of E flat 7 sharp 11. Moving into the last phrase, I did this. That's E flat minor 6 diminished into D minor 6 with this little lower neighbor tone before playing a single note D to let me move to this B flat 6 with the 1 borrowed note, and then onto G minor 6 with 2 borrowed notes, before resolving to this little F6 before I take the solo break. All in all, I don't think there's anything too outlandish here in terms of my choices for chord voicings, as well as when I decided to voice out the phrase fully versus when I decided to incorporate some single notes. By now, I'm hoping that you're getting a feel for how and why I make the choices that I do. If you hear things differently and want to experiment with different sounds or textures or colors, by all means, go ahead. These studies are never meant to be run through with any kind of dogmatic approach like classical music would. What I want you to get out of this is a method to put this together for yourself so that you can play more freely on standard tunes. Now, let's look at a set of chord voicings that we can use to comp with. For this tune, I decided to take things back to playing block chords. Now this was mainly for ease of playability, but also because the single note solo on this one is pretty busy and I didn't want to get in the way of that. Something we need to remember is that when it's time to comp, we're just there to provide a nice harmonic backdrop for the soloist or the vocalist. We are not the center of attention, and no one is there to listen to all the super hit moves that you can pull off under a soloist. It's in the name, folks, accompaniment. So while we might play busier every so often, there's truly nothing wrong with playing pads and giving the soloist some nice voicings to chew on. In this spirit, let's check out how I chose to voice the chords to this tune. Starting off, I use this B flat minor 6 for a G half diminished, then this D flat minor 6 for C7 flat 9, which resolves to this C6 in place of an F major 7. To get to the top of the next phrase, I use this C6 in place of A minor 7, and then E flat minor 6 for a D7 flat 9. That pulls up really nicely to this B flat 6 in place of G minor 7, and then I decided to use a little bit of movement in the form of these 2 chords, G minor 6, and then E diminished for different flavors of C7. The diminished chord has a lot of pull, and that moved me nicely to C6, which I used in place of F major 7. Then I played a different inversion of C6 for A minor 7, before using E flat diminished for a D7 flat 9 to bring me back around at the top of the next A section. To start off the second A, I played this B flat minor 6 to stand in for G half diminished, and then D flat diminished for C7 flat 9. F major 7 gets an F6 this time, because I just really like the voice leading that this provided. An added bonus to using the F6 here is that the top note of the chord gets held in common and makes the move to B half diminished sound really smooth. This chord should be super familiar in that it's a kind of a standard grip for a half diminished chord, but you'll probably notice I'm doing something funny with the fingering here. I'm using this fingering so that I can keep all 3 of these moves from F6 to this D minor 6 or B half diminished, and then finally to B diminished like this. That makes this whole section sound super smooth and also makes it kind of easy to play. I'll keep my third finger on the D string that whole time, and that also lets me move up to the next chord, E6, which I played in place of A major 7, super easy as well. For the F sharp minor 7 that comes next, I use this A6, followed by D6, F minor 6 with one borrowed note, and then resolve to A6. To get me to the bridge, I revoiced the A major 7 as this E6, and then played A minor 6 to stand in for D7 to pull me up to the top of the bridge. For the bridge, I decided to use these voicings. B flat 6 over G minor 7, G minor 6 with one borrowed note for a C7, C6 for F major 7, and then I revoiced F major 7 to this C6 to just get a little movement happening. The second half of the bridge, I played C minor 6 for A half diminished, E flat minor 6 for D7 flat 9, D minor 6 for G7, and finally D flat minor 6 with one borrowed note for the C7 to create some extra tension to move me into the last A section. For the last A section, I decided to play this B flat minor 6 that you've seen me play several times now for a G half diminished, and a different voicing of that D flat minor 6 with the one borrowed note idea for C7 flat 9. Then came C6, B flat minor 6 with one borrowed note, C minor 6, and then E flat minor 6 in place of F major 7, E flat 7 sharp 11, A half diminished, and D7 flat 9 respectively. The last phrase got these voicings. D minor 6 in place of G7, B flat 6 for G minor 7, G minor 6 with one borrowed note for C7, and finally C6 in place of F major 7. Something I hope you're seeing by now is that even though I tend to recycle and reuse a lot of the same substitutions, my comping choices always, at least to my ear, sound fresh and fit the harmony nicely. That's mainly because my chief concern isn't to play the hippest thing in the room at any given time. I'm only ever concerned with two things. First, what's the soloist doing? That's really the most important because, like I mentioned earlier, our main goal as accompanists is to do just that, accompany the soloist and make them sound great. My second concern while comping is this. What's the smoothest possible pathway through the changes, and how can I move as little as possible to make the next move happen? That's it. If you really internalize these substitution concepts and keep these things in the forefront of your mind, I think you're going to have a much easier time comping and keeping things interesting while doing so. Now, let's move on and check out the Improvisation Etude. All right, it's time once again to play through an Improvisation Etude. In case this is the first one of these that you're watching, I'd really suggest you hit pause now and go watch my videos on pivot arpeggios, as well as my video on how to practice jazz standards. Those are going to give you a better understanding of where some of these phrases are coming from, in case you're not familiar with all the ways that we can play chords out as single notes, or how we can use half steps to connect and extend lines. You'll find those links down in the description of this video. As always, the purpose of this etude is to put together everything that I've taught you so far and to write lines on the changes in a way that feels natural and improvisatory. I can hear some of you in the comments crying out already, but it's not improvisation if you're composing everything ahead of time. You would be correct, but jazz improvisation is bizarre in that learning to improvise often involves practicing very specific rote phrases again and again until they become part of our oral and muscle memory. In this way, we can learn to hear new and similar lines in real time and really bake in the concepts that we've learned so far. For this etude, I decided to do away with any serious restrictions on what I could write for the sake of either playability or for ease of reading. I wanted this one to sound as natural as possible without being overly ridiculous, so while there aren't any crazy double time runs in this one, everything else is fair game. Syncopations, triplet phrases, you name it. I even decided to play a solo break, and you better believe we're going to talk about how to do one of those effectively. Let's check out what that whole thing sounds like up to tempo with bass and drums before we pick apart some key phrases for you to hit the shed with. So obviously there's a ton to unpack in here, but I'm going to focus on smaller phrases this time around. My goal in doing that is for you to be able to immediately inject these little phrases into your own practice. They all more or less are going to be on short cycles of dominant to tonic, so you can either record yourself playing a cycle of keys doing that, or practice these over a tune where the same harmonic move shows up. Let's start out with that solo break though. There's a lot of good ways to do a solo break, but what I chose to do is directly imply some chord changes that would get me back to the top of the tune. The break happens after a hit on this F6, and then the changes I was thinking of were B flat 7, going to A half diminished, and then going to D7, which would then pull me to the G half diminished that starts the tune super well. I started out just playing down F major scale on the and of the 3 from the second of the scale, and then went into the half diminished via a half step. From there, I played this triplet lick, just spelling out the chord, and then came down the scale surrounding the root of the upcoming G half diminished so it would land on the beat. Here's what the break sounds like slowed down. It's pretty simple stuff, but at a brisk tempo off the back of that hit, I think it sounds super slick. Now, let's take a look at another phrase that happens over a 2-5 to the home key a little later on in the tune. This one happens in the second 4 bars of the first A section. I started out playing this little neighbor tone phrase off the second of a C7, the 5th of G, and then ran up to the 4th, where I played the chord down. From there, I pivoted to land on the 3rd of the C7, and then played some half steps to get back down to the 3rd of the F major that comes next. I think that's another super simple but effective phrase. I especially like the leap of a 6 if you haven't figured that out already. Check out what this one sounds like at a slow tempo. Last, let's see how I managed that pesky key change to A major. Let's start out on the F major right before the key change happens. Starting out on the 3rd, I played up the chord and then came down the scale with 2 half steps. That let me land on the 3rd of the B half diminished right on the beat. Then I just came down the scale to the 3rd of the E7, played up the diminished. The flat 9th at the top of that chord let me resolve really smoothly into the 5th of the A major that comes next. Check out what that sounds like at a slower tempo. Well, my friends, we've come to the end of yet another one. As always, I hope that you've been able to gain some greater insight into how to improvise in general, and more specifically, some new strategies for blowing over this tune. I told you these were going to start getting more difficult as we went. Was there a particular spot that you thought was especially troublesome? Do you want to see me cover any particular aspect of improvisation, either chordal or with single notes in more detail? Drop a comment down below and let me know about it. If you haven't already, be sure to like this video if you found it helpful. And make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon so you don't miss an upload. The next episode of Improvise Like a Pro should be out sometime next month, but it's going to mark the end of what I'm calling Season 1 of this series. Don't worry, there's going to be more deep dives like this in the future for sure, and you're still going to have new shorter videos every Sunday to keep you busy here at the studio. Don't forget to go check out my Patreon page if you're hungry for more material. That's where you can find all the written examples from this, as well as every other video here on the channel in PDF format, in addition to some killer monthly bonuses for patrons only. Special thanks go out to my wonderful patrons, PH, Josh, David Zuckerbrand, Patrick Caron, and Jazz Luminaire patron Vibhav Bapti. You guys' support means the world to me. Thank you so much for joining the studio. A huge thanks to all of you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.